This is an incredibly important, powerful, significant episode with one of the founders of Ferrone Ferrone law firm, John Ferrone himself. He's a deep, committed activist in the warrior space. He represents the prison guard unions, police, fire in California, and is deeply involved from a firsthand in the trenches perspective, all of the blowback of suicide, of resiliency issues, of addiction that's happening. And the insights that this man has brought are profound and mandatory watching. So if you are a first responder, if you're military, police, fire, whatever it is, this is a must-watch episode.
Especially if you're a chief or a city council or somebody that's trying to make decisions for your city or county. Make sure to take this into consideration because we dive deep into the value of training and preventative training versus the true cost of not having a preventative program in place around resiliency. So definitely must listen episode. We'll see you there. Hello, friends. Welcome to another podcast episode of the Wenner Folsom podcast, your source for battle-tested leadership and resiliency. And we got a great guest for you today. Philip?
We do. This is actually one of my favorite humans. This is a man that I've worked with professionally. I enjoy him personally. He is he's an advocate. He's a champion for warrior culture. And I don't mean that just in the esoteric sense, but literally goes to war in courtrooms to protect and provide for the men and women who are the ones on the front line. And so Mr. John Ferrone is one of the founders of Ferrone Ferrone law firm, representing a bunch of first responders here in California. And I admire you as a person. I admire what you do, John. It's just an honor to have you on the show today.
Oh, thank you, Joshua and Philip, for having me. It's an honor to be here to share insights and experiences in this area. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So as obviously warriors ourselves, both Josh and I are veterans, and experiencing addiction, which both of us have been deep into, experiencing the loss of more brothers than I can count that I've lost to suicide. Like, we're in the trenches, and you are too, but you're seeing it from a slightly different perspective. You're seeing it from compensation, lawsuits, protecting it before it gets to that point. So you want to just kind of give a little overview of what you do, John?
Yeah, that's great. Great question. So I navigate a lot of the safety officers, both police, fire, corrections, through a very beleaguered workers' compensation system. If a member is facing PTSI, they may have available workplace benefits for them. The problem is you have an individual who's extraordinarily under pressure, probably not really fully disclosing the scale of what they're experiencing, that is the symptoms, and then entering into a system that is going to ravage them even further. And so for the most part, these cases turn into a tragic end for a lot of them, because they don't understand really the scale of what they're facing. And it's one thing to take somebody who has a physical injury and they can navigate through a map. It's another to take an emotional trauma injury and then put them in a dark room. They're already frightened.
Yeah.
And I think the combination of these factors creates really a perfect storm for the member to not understand how to navigate and really the scale of the pressure coming on top of them already.
Right. And you're cutting them off from their community and threatening their identity by threatening to remove their badge, gun, job. They're very core of who they are as men and women.
Yeah, there's a loss of identity, but there's also a significant fiscal impact if they enter this system. They don't understand that by and large, the majority of these cases are going to be denied, which means no income or burning your own sick time. And that doesn't last forever. And then a lot of times agencies institute a weapon called fitness for duty. And that really is the ultimate, I think, unhinging of this system. It creates the very mistrust as to why there is a barrier for people to get care. And as a result, what we see every day is the following answer to this question: how are you doing? I'm fine. And we're not going to create a safe space to say, I'm not fine. And I actually wish someone would listen to me until we remove this threat. And I have countless stories where the officers firmly believe that if they revealed anything, they would lose their job. And then tragically, in a case that I had where the officer committed suicide and was ODing and was going into multi-organ failure, and him and his wife were having their last exchange, and talk about how traumatic this is in your house. The exchange was, don't call 911 because I'll lose my job. And that was the argument that they had. Ultimately, she was able to get him into the car to take him to the hospital, but it was too late. But it was a misplaced belief rooted in such fear. And that's the system, unfortunately, we have today. And so you're going to continue to see a cycle of hypervigilance, what they call the slow burn PTSI symptoms, dysfunctional behavior, dysfunctional communication, a heavy weight on the marriage and families. It will take a toll because there's just not a true sharing. And when you ignore your spouse and not share, think about when they find out the scale of what you're going through, they're not going to understand it.
Yep.
So,
well, and just to add to that, it's now like the stats are in. It is suicide's now the number one cause of death for fire, police, veterans. So if that's not and unfortunately, at least that's what we're seeing is now that's why they're paying attention, is because people are committing suicide and now they're forced to pay attention. But to your point, John, I've seen this very common thing where somebody goes, hey, we want to change the system. Let me talk about what's happening for me. And now they're actually they're disciplined. And so what's happening is they're learning, don't say a word. Because and I think I think there's a couple different viewpoints. Like when I look at a chief, for example, they're in a tough predicament because, like, how do you set a course in place where you're not condoning certain behavior, but you're also creating preventional care? Like, how do you get care? And if they do find out about something and then somebody goes and has an accident or there's something that happens on the job. So I think it's a tricky role of what's your responsibility or fiduciary responsibility as a leadership and as a member, and how do we start to solve this system that we move away from suicide and mental health problems being the number one reason why members are dying,
John, can you shared with us last year, not just talking about the social cost, or the virtuous cost, but the financial impact of, the blast radius of a suicide.
Yeah. I mean,
or even sending someone to fucking rehab.
Yeah. I mean, the blast radius of somebody doing this, and I've had the sad reality, of these cases, and it really rips the department apart. The fabric, the core relationship between the firefighters association or the police officers association and the management is now going to be rooted in mistrust. We didn't do enough, and that question will linger for a long time, and there will be lots of guilt following that. And you're seeing even more this, as you mentioned, Joshua, the pervasiveness after retirement even. So the rate is going up because the access to care has been the problem. They've been programmed not to really divulge and tell them, is it safe to even say it now? But the cost is massive to these departments. You're talking just the culture itself and mistrust of, hey, they're not going to take care of me. Don't ever trust them. And that's something you can't just rebuild overnight. And it's going to take months and months and years. And the cases that I've worked on were very traumatic for the departments. I mean, none of these cases are easy to ascertain. But if you build a system that allows a person to kind of have a safe place to go into, you can start changing the culture. And I think I'm working on a project right now, and I'll email this over to you. And it's going to be kind of the first pilot project of its kind. And what it does is it addresses the problem before it even becomes a workers' compensation claim. In fact, what you're trying to do is say, if you don't feel well, here's a safe place, no reviewed medical care. Here's the protocols of authorization for that care. Here are the rates. Here are the providers. And members, here is now a better map. As you've always said to me, Philip, we're map-driven people. This is a better map. And then it culturally changes the way these people will be approaching this problem. And you're going to take away the fitness for duty weapon. If they come into the system, they're not subject to that. You build in sick time, automatically start paying them so they have a soft landing. Provide them light duty or special assignment so they have identity. And then provide the kind of care to get them back to the mental fitness that they need to sustain the job. And I think it's important to note that the Army did this. General Casey started this process, some time ago. And he realized the structural problems that he faced in trying to change an army of you have 1 million employees, right? And you are trying to change a culture that forever only focused on the physical fitness. And that was it. That was the measure of what a good soldier was.
Ready for
duty. Huh?
Ready for duty. Yeah.
Ready for duty. And it's not, now they realize, well, if you're not mentally ready, you can make mistakes. And if I'm in a Bradley looking down an apartment line in Ramadi, I don't notice that this coordinate was wrong by one number. What happens?
Yep.
You have fratricide. Really a mistake that can be easily common, no different than the police with the weapons they have and the public, right? Firefighters making a mistake that could be life-threatening.
Unregulated police officers making a mistake that burns our country down.
Correct.
It's woohoo.
And I think this is really valid because this is what we see. I mean, what we do with Valor, we go in and train on all these practices. And the common objection I have is, hey, this sounds great. I know our members need this. And this is in police, fire, military, across the board, health departments, hospitals, ER doctors, nurses, the same languages. Sounds really great. I know we need it, but we can't afford it. And one of the feedback we've gotten from you, which is very helpful, is, well, let's just go through the budget for a second. Suicide's the number one cause of death. So it's not it's when, if you don't have a preventative program in place. And here's what it's actually going to cost. One suicide, from what I remember, what you told me is the average is 2.5 times the salary to replace a member.
Oh, without a doubt.
A lot of times you have, and tell me if this is correct. This is what I had from you. There may be others, or if I understood it, but just to replace the member, 2.5 times the salary. Typically there's a ricochet. So if one person does it, there's another one that comes shortly after. So 2 people, 2.5 times the salary. In addition to that, I remember you said, hey, just look at your overtime budgets and figure out disciplinary problems and also mistakes.
So you're already at you're at $1 million, right? You're over $1 million right now.
Yeah, I mean, the cost of the backfill overtime and the staffing is going to exceed the value and the cost of the program itself. And I've already identified that the cost of these delays, just in the bell curve of injuries, which is orthopedic injuries, the cost of the overtime backfill is massive, into the millions. They could slice off so much of this waste, bring it into a robust program that's rooted in trust and empathy. And what we're trying to do is change the optics. We care about you. We care about our community. Think of the messaging outwardly to people that are distrustful of public safety to begin with. Mm-hmm. You're now taking care of them by building robust systems. And guess what? The biggest obstacle is you guys, is the cost. The retirees go to their Blue Cross, HMO. The quality of the care in those networks has diminished. These physicians now want payment in cash. And so you can't find quality doctors who understand trauma at your level, right? They're not the experts at safety trauma. They may be therapists for, family crisis, but not this type of trauma. And so you're trying to bridge this gap and figure out the obstacle. Cost is one of the biggest obstacles. And then obviously, I think the culture piece is there as well.
So ounce of prevention.
Oh, 1 ounce of prevention, but think of what you've done to the community, your community and your employees. You've demonstrated now an alignment that you've told me, vision and leadership. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to not only talk the talk, but I'm going to walk it. I'm going to say we're going to take care of you by doing something that's going to cost money, but in the long run, the small percentage of those files creates the biggest blast radius in your department. You'd invest that kind of money and show that it can work.
And I think what's really important to note is, yes, it's the members that we're rehabilitating, and actually, like, this happens from on the job. this is what your job entails, is you're going to take some emotional debris. There's no way to deny it. But what it does is, in addition to that, if the member starts to learn tools on how to regulate their nervous system, how to start to communicate the level of severity of the trauma they take on at work, and build good resiliency protocols and reintegration protocols, they're now communicating in the family unit. And what we don't measure currently is, we don't measure the blowback in family units, how much PTSD is happening or PTS is happening in family units from the spouse, the kiddos that are just recreating trauma. We don't count suicides from kiddos, spouses. We only count members in the departments as the number one cause of death. We don't actually cause all, like you said, retirements. We don't cause like car accidents, all this other blowback. That's actually part of the same trauma response. So I think it's a fiduciary responsibility, not only for our job, but for our communities. Like, let's actually heal the people that are taking care of us. Let's help them heal their families, because this is our next generation, right? This is like the number one cause of death amongst youth is suicide. Like, well, so it's,
but it's just not normal to view this trauma and to not have some, radioactive waste that's going to continue to attach itself to your brain. I mean, I've seen homicide files. This stuff is disturbing. I can't get that stuff out of my head. I mean, it's like, I don't want to ever see it. Now, the fact that they've got to see traumatic events, and the worst is the traumatic impact on those victims and those families, there's no way to really debrief and solve that. And the suicide files that I've had to deal with, these were years in the making, years. It wasn't just, I woke up one day, I feel bad, and the next day it's over. And I did this talk with what's called Peer Support, Public Safety Peer Support Association in San Diego in 2019. And there were 3 widows. And the discussion was navigating through suicide from the perspective of these widows. And each one gave a story of basically living in a hurricane for 3 years or 4 years of dysfunctional behavior, committed to the family and putting everything there. But that significant other had only literally breadcrumbs and leftovers for that wife, that spouse to deal with, because they were under such trauma. And it's just unfortunate now, they're starting to create peer support for the significant others, because really this is the telling sign. When you ask a wife, like, what's going on in the house, you learn how they're communicating, how they're behaving, how they're sleeping, how they're reacting to their children. And then you can understand, okay, we have a problem here that we need to address. And again, it goes to cost. If you're going to pay for something small, which they think is large, in the end it's not, because they don't get a whole lot of these cases, the impact is massive in terms of the returns going forward.
And for the men and women who are watching, and who are experiencing this from, inside, just realizing that there's a reintegration issue that we're talking about here as going to work, and you have to put on a particular set of armor to function and to deal with the homicides, John, that you're talking about, to deal with a dead kid, deal with somebody, like there's some heavy traumatic loads on those. And so you have to armor up to be able to navigate that high trauma field. But going back to the family unit, going back to the civilian world and taking that armor off is not taught. They're not teaching the reintegration systems, purification, regulation, which is our ancient birthright of what we have always taught warriors to be able to bring them home complete. And so it's a substantial thing for all of you people listening, that the system of preparing you to be able to return home is where the root of it is. Because we all signed up to do the hard things. We signed up to do heavy jobs. John, you signed up to do heavy jobs, and that we accept that duty. It's just how we deal with it. That's the big question.
But hey, just one comment on that, yeah. Philip. I think this is important to note. It's literally just training. Like, I want to simplify this. Like, I think a lot of times organizations, we're sticking our head in the sand because this is the way it's been done since we think back to the training. And the training works really effectively to do your job. So the current protocols work for on the job. It's just the gap that's missing is there's no training, there's no protocol. And what Philip mentioned on how to reintegrate back home. And once you have that, you have awareness, you don't think you're crazy. You stop shaming yourself. You start to recognize currently the mental health, let's call it problems, or the spousal problems or the conflicts or the things that are happening at home, instead of thinking you're broken and fucked up and like shaming yourself and isolating, the whole family unit starts to go, oh, trauma sign. I took on some excess trauma. This is an indicator of a warning light that my truck needs to be repaired, needs some repair and maintenance. And if I practice the tools, I get the truck repaired, I'm back on the freeway. So I think there's a normalization of, it's not this big thing that we just need to avoid and can't solve. It's actually very solvable for, I'd say 80, 90% of members out there. There's a small number that have to maybe change careers, or they've experienced too much, and you can't just rehabilitate as easy. Right. But 80, 90%, a couple quick tools within the family unit, and you're reintegrated and back off to the races. So I think that's a important thing to note. It's very actionable and very trainable. It's just missing currently. Hey, we thank you for listening to the Wenner Folsom podcast. Just a couple quick notes. First, if you are a man and you're looking for an honorable and inspiring group of men to hold you accountable and challenge you to grow in your relationships, your fitness, your career, your finances, and your life, go to www.k4men.com. And if you are a veteran, first responder, or man or woman who deals with trauma, and you are looking for some resiliency tools and skills for you, your team, and your organization, go to valorresiliency.com. Hope to see you there. Back to the podcast.
Oh, I can't endorse that enough. The training piece is so lacking, and that preventative reality is so easy to do. To give these safety officers the proper tools to handle the trauma, but also kind of when they reintegrate back into their domestic life away from it, they know how to communicate and share. And this is a problem, that they just don't do that. They come home and then the shell is there and they're not going to share and unload. And this is when you want to say, hey, I don't feel good. And then we need an avenue for that purpose. And, we've had successes. And so, now the law in California recognizes that PTSI is a presumptive workers' compensation injury. And in fact, they amended the federal PSOB, law for suicide and death if there is a PTSI diagnosis as well. So the dial, is moving slowly in terms of recognizing that these injuries for public safety are occurring. Then the question, is, do you enter a system like that today? And that's really the question that I think these members that are listening, you're going through, you're struggling. Do you file something like this, knowing, well, the law is set up to help you get through that, but they don't quite know all of the obstacles that you're going to face to get there. And it's an extraordinarily stressful experience to navigate to that end. What is the goal? Yep. And it's a conversation piece with a lot of people to figure out, are you stabilized? Can you handle the stress? Can you have your life, an intrusion in your life and have a deposition taken and examined, and coworkers then hear the dirty laundry. They don't know what's going on. And there's such, a mistaken myth about when someone is out on stress, they're really marginalized and shamed. Oh, they can't handle the job. And that's really the cultural piece of it, where now they're being dismissive, and then the person feels bad for feeling bad. I mean, think about that. It's like, I don't want to share because I'm going to be looked upon as weak. So therefore I'll make myself feel worse than I already did.
Will you break apart for anybody listening, you said PTSI, and will you talk about that process for a second? Because I think you're hitting the nail on the head. This is how you start to get rehabilitated, is you have to say, hey, am I experiencing these symptoms? And what I'm hearing from you is, if you do get acknowledged, there's federal mandates in place, but that bridge to get acknowledged is a lot of times looked at as the shame in the department. Is that just to clarify what you're saying?
Yeah, for the post-traumatic stress injuries that are arising from work, it's kind of a potential benefit system for these injured safety officers. It levels the playing field in the sense that if you have a diagnosis of this condition, it's presumptive, meaning that it's presumed to be work-related. And so the burden of proof is actually lower, which makes it easier to win that case. That doesn't make the journey going through this jungle any easier. And so what I'm trying to tell people is that if you're on the fence and you're feeling this, you need to connect with, a specialist, first of all, to pause and say, is today the right time? What are my finances like? What's my job situation like? What are my goals in life? How do I have my symptoms stabilized? Do I need to go on a retreat and learn more resiliency so I could handle this next storm? or do I just get back in a rowboat and go head back into the ocean? And so these are the things that you have to really understand and nuance the next stage of it, because it's gonna, there's gonna be knives thrown at you, and you got to be ready for this next stage. And a lot of people are not. They enter it thinking it's presumptive, they file it, and they don't realize that, okay, now fitness or duty. I can give you a terrible story of just how these things can unhinge. And so I had an officer with a city who was having difficulty at work, and he was overreacting to things. And people are like, hey, you know what? You're angry. People are complaining. Then he had a heartfelt conversation with his chief. I'm struggling. My granddaughter is, young age and has cancer. And that would strike anybody to the core. And the employer's response is just, it frightens me, was, you're relieved of duty. You have to show up to a medical exam and you may lose your job. And of course, the guy's crying in the chief's office, like, I just gave you my soul and this is the response: mistrust. And so, that's the kind of culture piece that is continuing to plague officers who face trauma, is that you share and then you face this reality and then you're scrutinized, and it's not a safe place. It's just not. And I keep telling officers, yeah, you'll win the file. You'll win, presumptive, right. But to get there, realize what you're about to understand. You're in a plane, turbulence. Do you like that experience? On a boat, storm. Do you like that? This is what it's going to be like for a while. And so let's connect with your significant other. Let's try to find a light duty position. So, the least of the worst options. And so that's kind of how I'm approaching this problem today. And then trying to really build a better dialogue with these cities and associations to understand that if you ignore a problem, it doesn't go away. And if you ignore people and their symptoms and the trauma, you're sending them a message that you just don't care. So why should they trust you? Why should their output always be 110%? And this is going to lead to attrition, transferring laterals, staffing problems,
engagement, retention,
and the cycle continues.
Yeah.
And if they don't have the right staffing numbers, guess what? You're
overtime,
mandatory overtime. And the more exposure, mandatory overtime leads to what? More trauma, more trauma, more trauma. So we see that the cycle never is just it's a record that's going to continue to play.
Hey, everybody listening, send this to your chief. This is the information. This is the overview of this strategic challenge in front of us. This is really, really important, high level information that gives us a very prescriptive response to.
I think just from trying to get into departments, I think it's more than just the chief. Yes, the chief, but like the city council, right? Like typically how departments, at least for fire and police, hospitals are actually very different. Right. But anybody that's dealing with trauma, fire, police get their budgets allocated from the city. So they're usually saying, I want this for my members, but some of them with the defunding the police cut their budgets in half or so they're going, now I have less of a budget. I'm barely able to man my team. Where am I going to get resiliency budgets to actually take care of their mental health? So for us in our communities wanting to be safe and protected, we're cutting budgets instead of giving more budgets to say, hey, let's get your mental health handled. Let's get you some good resiliency protocols. Let's get you some ways to, when you notice you're activated, how do you regulate yourself and actually start to support our communities and you're part of the community. So I think it's a valid conversation, not just for the chief and departments, but it's also for city council. Mm-hmm. Like if we don't solve this as a community, it's coming into the communities. Like Philip, you talk a lot about the canary in the coal mine. Well, hey guys, when we saw even defunding happening, I know a lot of people that were like, okay, well then you handle problems now. Like you're going to cut us out. So, and I know in some areas where I know different police, they're like, well, these areas where people are going, like, we can't handle it now. You don't want us, so you deal with it. Now there's more robberies, there's more problems happening. So I don't want to go too far off, but I think I wanted to just show the parallel of
murder's up.
Murder's up. Yeah.
I mean, engagement is difficult today. I mean, you got to realize that they're engaging at a different experience for the trauma itself. And the blowback of the law called SB2, which is a decertification law for the police. Basically, even if you're cleared of your involvement in a traffic stop or suspect, the state can still file to decertify you. That is your license to be a police officer, with a committee of 9 people, 5 of which are former victims of police violence. And so this is a cultural reality of kicking a can down further and not recognizing that kind of oversight, while there is importance in oversight, building a proper infrastructure for mental fitness, really helps do a lot to understand what they're going through. And I think that it's a great point you made, Joshua, about the budget, because so much money is wasted on overtime. They don't understand this reality, that if they saved literally 15 to 20% of the backfill caused by workers' comp and overtime, which is in the millions, by the way, you have your program right there. And it's just done. It's like if you just save 10%, 15%, you can create a robust program. And the program that we're trying to design without filing a workers' comp claim, it's like, we don't want to come into litigation. Cities, counties realize this. You build this access way, this safe runway for an officer to say, I'm coming off the field. Philip, where do I go? You're going to go here. Your 30 days of sick time. And you're going to go to these places that are already pre-authorized. They're going to feel great. They're going to feel like, wow. And this isn't like you're giving them a vacation in Hawaii and staying at the most expensive, hotel. This is like related to their job.
It's like a resiliency center.
Yes, exactly.
That we've had in tribal cultures forever.
Yep.
Called a sweat lodge, called a vision quest. Duh.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm working with Huntington Beach right now. So that is one of the cities I'm working with, and their police officer union and their firefighters are trying to push this idea. And I kind of said to them, you know what, I've kind of pushed this idea on the orthopedic care. If you build an orthopedic avenue into the system and a better map for orthopedic care, which represents 3/4 of your cases, you're going to have a reduction in litigation. You're going to get people back to work sooner. You're going to remove the obstacles. Likewise, if you do the same for PTSI, you are actually showing them to the most sensitive issues. We care about you. And we're going to build something that's lasting and enduring so that you don't exit out and then end up being another statistic.
John, you're going to put your law firm out of business, bro.
Well, that's the tough challenge I'm facing, is that you have to take a step in the right direction. And to build an enduring organization, you have to improve and take less. And that's good. I mean, in a way, I've realized that it's okay. It's okay. If I leave this planet Earth and I've saved lives in the process, I'm content. Remember me for that, not, another case.
You'll be fighting some virtuous cause, John.
Yes, exactly. And this one is as dear to me. And I'm speaking again at the Public Safety Peer Support October 18th and 19th. And I put together a unique panel. So I have a therapist named Gina Gallivan, and I have a peer support organizer, Deanna from San Diego, and they have a unique model. And so we're going to discuss, what are the barriers? Why is it people don't get care? They don't wake up after playing their best round of golf at Pebble Beach and say, hey, Phil, I got a hole-in-one and now I want to go get treatment. It's always as a result of a cataclysmic event of negativity that's now compelling them. A domestic violence, DUI, some traumatic event that's now going, I now have to go get care because I'm at the end. And the question is that really the optics? Should we be doing that model, or is there another way we can actually approach this problem?
Yeah.
Ongoing care versus, I don't feel good. I have an access point. I can go get care, talk about it, feel good. Doesn't do anything. It's not an MRI. It's not a back surgery. It's just talking this problem through, getting you used to communicating.
Hey, I gotta, this is something that I learned from you that stayed with me to this day. And Josh and I deal with, when Josh mentioned trauma signs, these are the sadism, that we see from activated police officers. We see depression, but a big one is addiction. This is a very common symptom or trauma sign of PTS. And you were sharing about one of the responses that departments has is to get them to rehab. I happen to know, some of the recidivism rates for rehab. It's almost a waste of fucking time. And just to speak into the cost of that and the Band-Aid function of it, you had some really good thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's another problem that, again, we see time and time again. Alcoholism and drug use, but primarily alcoholism. I think culturally, people, when the chips are down, they reach for a Jack and Coke. And the reality of drinking, the problem is it makes the problem now worse. It interferes with the sleep patterns. It creates now a separate dynamic that's going to now attach itself in a negative way to the actual idea of PTSI. Because now what cities and counties do is, oh, they have alcoholism and it's not post-traumatic stress. Therefore, I'm now challenging the presumption itself. And then trying to
get symptomatic.
Exactly. But they're going to now say it's an independent cause. And so it creates a dynamic, but also, getting to the right programs is difficult. This is in California, sober living places and rehab places. It's like the Wild West. You don't know where you're going. And there's some sharks out there and some bad ones. And the problem is, if the member doesn't end up in the right facility, they will get back into the stream of a bad result. And this is a Band-Aid where, again, hey, this place, sober living, this place, oh, it's $5,000 or $2,000. We'll find the cheapest one. We'll send you there 30 days and you're out. And it's like, that's not going to work. And so again, it goes back to the approach of finding out the most thorough, in-depth programs. And I'd like your take on this, because I'm going to send you the pilot project that I'm doing and the facilities and the types of care, and you can add to it. I'm trying to this is going to be a cannon shot to this city because it's big. And because it's going to go right to the department itself. The department's going to say, we want this, something outside of risk management altogether. But I think that the Band-Aid approach will not solve the problem. And cycling these people back into the workforce to only see them 60 days, 6 months later, start drinking again. And then they're going to find a termination, loss of job, loss of family. And then ultimately, like in Alameda, this firefighter ended up killing himself. And it was just sad because he needed care. He didn't know where to turn to help. Drinking a bottle of vodka every day to solve his anxiety was his thought process of how do I get out of hell? But the problem is it just opened the doorway back into hell, and he never got out of it. And so again, it goes just to the care issue. You build a better system, you're actually going to reduce claims. And San Diego has kind of done that with their peer support. They've made it, non-confrontational, non-punitive. But it took them a decade to alter the cultural thought processes of how you react to someone complaining of stress. So it's not overnight.
I think it's an interesting outlook of that. Currently, alcohol is part of the culture and is accepted, but actually learning to take care of yourself isn't. It's like, to me, it's like, oh, no wonder we have everybody like, thank you for your 20, 30 years of service. Let me send you away with the triple D, divorced, drunk, and disabled. Have a nice life is currently how we take care of our people. And also what I'm finding out in some markets is their solution is they're actually like recruiting, like they're looking at the dates and times to figure out how long, like I'm not going to say the market because I don't want to blast them, but there's a market that did the research and found out the average police officer retires after 30 years. So the new recruits, they don't get retirement till after 30 years. So what they're doing is they're basically, I'm just really scared of what's happening to our communities is we're making them the villain. They're not the villain. Trauma is the villain from our perspective. Right. And the way that we heal it is tools to navigate that. And what most people don't realize is the really bad things are bringing things up from childhood. We all have trauma. We all have something that happened. And if you're two members maybe on the job seeing a child fatality.
Oh, Josh, can you talk about just hit that pre-trauma real quick for the folks who are listening?
When we do research, pre-trauma is essentially what types of things happened in childhood. There's big T and little T trauma. A lot of people are very familiar with big T trauma, like abuse or sexual abuse or some things that happen. Little T is like you maybe felt abandoned, or I knew a firefighter who put his mom into rehab and his dad left, right? So here's this little kid that has nobody there, felt abandoned. So that would be like a form. He had family there, but he still felt abandoned. So feeling inadequate, feeling like nobody sees you, feeling abandoned. So there's all these things that happen in childhood. And typically what we see is in rehabilitating members, and it could be either military-based, fire, police, hospitals, the ones that really stick with them and throw them massively offline are the ones that trigger unconsciously something that reminds them of an unconscious childhood trauma. And that's why they're actually drawn to the field. So guess what? All your members, they're drawn to helping others, because that's one of the ways we cope with having some abuse in childhood, is we're drawn to help other people to avoid dealing with our own.
And the
want to save
pre-trauma
everybody
rates,
else.
pre-trauma rates and ACEs. Hit that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead if you want to run through it. But essentially, there's an ACEs test that talk about what are the pre-trauma in childhood, and amongst all the fire, police, military, hospital, anybody that deals with trauma, it's higher. It's almost like 80% or something very high, 70 to 80% amongst members. So you're not, if you just recruit new members, you're getting more pre-trauma members that are going to have the same problem. So it's not about recruiting new members. It's about rehabilitating the current members so that we have long-term care and take care of our community.
Yeah, and that's I think that's an amazing point, because as these individuals are recruited, they're facing the very actual trauma that's going to trigger this. And it resonated with me, because I remember one of my first PTSD cases was a cop who he had to deal with a child homicide, and it impacted him so profoundly, because when he discovered the body of this young child who was only 8 years old at the time. His son was 8 at the time, and he could not escape this kind of reaction, and it tore him apart. He carried the picture around of the victim, and it was just like this unhinged his world. After 25 years, he was cop, moved his way through, became a homicide officer, and then this one case was it. And again, there was no on the back end what to do with it. And I've dealt with this a lot, where have had a critical incident and they don't do anything about it. And like, I'll give you an example of one where my client had to go through this tragic reality of an officer that has to knock on the door of a victim to tell the family that their loved one is gone. And there's no preparation for this. There's no training for it, nothing. You just, hey, you have to go to the Smith residence and tell them their daughter was murdered. And you go there and then deal with that reality. You already know about the case, the horrific nature of the victim, what has happened. Then you're now introduced to another storm. And again, the departments don't realize the scale of the madness coming their way. And then I have to now go back to work. You're literally do that. 6 hours later, you're back on a call. You're now down in, Gardena or Compton facing, a confrontational situation. You've not been adequately debriefed of that issue at all. So, I mean, it's good.
Well, and I just want to normalize it as we start to wrap up. Is I think we're really starting to show what's happening. Is these are people that sign up to serve. They want to make our communities better. They come in and they're dealing with horrific shit, and then there's no training to deal with that except for drink. Right? Hey, let's go have a drink.
Numb and cope
and go back to work. Because if not, you're not mentally fit to do the job. And so you protect it at work and hide it down. You protect it at home. And here's I think what we're saying, if there's one thing to really grasp from this, they're just training in tools. And once you learn the training, you learn how to basically handle this type of stress. It's just heavy stress trauma response. And when you learn the resiliency protocols, when you learn to communicate the level of severity and what to do as a family unit, you're just adjusting how you manage that and move it through the body. Very much how they did in ancient cultures to get your soul back, because you lose a part of you. And when you get it back, you can either stay or change departments, but at least you're not ending by exiting your life and creating these massive holes. So I think if anybody listening, like, this is all solvable. I just want people to understand that. And like, how do we start to make this a must that we're taking care of our people and actually solving this? So it's not just the current members, it's their families and multiple generations of lineage trauma. We're basically blowing up our communities of the impact in every home of every member that's in any of these service-based departments, which now they're going to be in the same next generation of police, fire, like they do the same careers because they have the same trauma at home, military. So like, I think it's just a fiduciary responsibility for all of us to protect our communities by protecting all the members in them. So.
And again, I can't emphasize, there are exciting solutions to this problem. And they are, again, when you root a solution in empathy and trust, you instill a human reaction that you care. And this is all these officers want to hear. you care about them and their well-being, that is key. That should be, we don't care about the cost. That is priceless right there. We should be investing in the infrastructure so that these officers feel a safe place to unload the toxic, events in their day-to-day life, that they have a place to go without punitive reaction. And then the family unit is safe. And then we send a message to the community. We're actually doing our part to not only show that they're physically fit, but they're mentally fit for this job as well.
John,
hey,
you and your brother and every man and woman at that law firm, God bless you.
No, thank you again for allowing me to be here. I thoroughly enjoy hanging with you guys and really collaborating in this space, because it truly is, been a can kicked down and ignored for so long that it's time, and it's just time to do the right thing.
Hey, and who would be the ideal? Would it be members that get a hold of you?
Yep.
Like, if anybody listening, if a member's going, hey, can you maybe describe who your ideal client is and how they can best contact you?
Yeah, I mean, any public safety officer listening, you can have my email address and my phone number, and it's just navigating. If you're even needing resources and you're a vet, we have an infrastructure of places to go, just like with Joshua and Philip. But if you're a public safety officer in the state of California and you're facing this trauma and this decision of what do I do, you reach out to us. We have creative solutions to try to figure this out and help navigate you away from the storm. That's really the key that you must understand here. Don't head into a storm unless you're prepared.
And hey, we'll list John's information in the show notes, so that way you guys can get a hold of him directly. And also, hey, if you're an organization looking for resiliency, that's what we do with Valor. We go in and we'll have a book coming out soon. We'll have a digital program, as well as a train the trainer to build resiliency in the near future. But we do go in and train organizations if your organization's ready and looking for some resiliency training. So
love it. No, thank you again, guys.
Godspeed, my friend.
Excellent, guys.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, guys. Take care.